Hello and welcome to this episode of a Rust Nightmare featuring my cheap modern classic, the 20-year-old BMW 7 Series that's been sitting neglected for years. In the previous episode I decided to fully restore this, often called the most hated BMW 7 Series of all time, and bring it back to its former glory. You saw how I completely stripped down the underbody and uncovered some rusty spots, but thankfully everything is still solid metal. Or at least it looks that way. But now it's time for the most challenging part of this transformation, and that's going to be removing of all that rust. I will even try to save some of the rusty hydraulic pipes, as they're either crazy expensive or no longer available. And let's not forget the crusty differential. So let's get started.
Firstly, I will introduce the tools needed for the rust removal process. I will need an angle grinder with a cordless drill and some wire brush wheels. Additionally, some abrasive sheets and pads, and of course a full face mask with a respirator for protection. Once everything was prepared, I began grinding away all the rust. However, I had to skip recording this part of the process because there was so much dust, and I didn't want to risk damaging my camera. My body is proof of it. In the next step of process, I started applying the rust remover gel from Hammerite on cleaned areas and as well on places where it's impossible to reach with a wire brush or any other thing for removing the rust. Where it was possible, I used a combination of the rust remover gel and the wire brush to remove the rust. Next step, the bent bottom section of the rocker panel next to the jacking point. I'm going to straighten it with a hammer and clean it properly. Same process for the other jacking points. Next, sorting out the rust from the boot area. Since the Logic 7 amplifier is faulty, I've decided to remove it for further inspection and repair. I left the rust remover gel on the treated areas overnight, as it works well as an inhibitor to prevent rust from returning for a short while, since clean metal exposed to air tends to rust again. In the next step, I'm going to remove the dried out rust remover gel from the treated areas. Clean water is the best solution for this. So first I will use a pressure washer and then I will use a sponge with a soapy water. After that I waited until everything dried out, and I even used an air gun to speed up the process. Afterward, I began cleaning everything with a surface cleaner and a microfiber cloth. During this process, I discovered a few rust spots that needed to be treated, such as this wiring hole in the wheel arch area. And here is a better look at the underbody after cleaning. There are still some small rust spots that couldn't be removed with the angle grinder or rust remover gel, but that will be addressed in the next step. Next, I'll use a rust converter. This advanced formulation neutralizes and converts rust while acting as an inhibitor to prevent its return. It also works as a primer, so it's perfect for prepping the metal before painting or sealing. Now I'll spray the rust converter from about 15 to 25 centimeters away using thin, even layers. I don't want to spray too much at once, just light coats to avoid drips or runs. I'll do 2 or 3 thin coats, waiting about 15 minutes between each one to let it dry, as per instructions. Once the rust converter dries, it leaves a dark protective layer to stop rust. After 24 hours, it will be fully cured and ready for painting or sealing. In the next step, I'll be using a polyurethane seam sealer with a sprayable seam sealing gun. I have to reseal the areas where I removed the old sealant earlier. This will be my first time using this tool, so it'll be a bit a learning experience. But I'm excited to see how it works for adding extra protection against rust. Before applying the seam sealer to the underbody, I'll set up and test the sprayable seam sealer on a piece of cardboard. Since it's my first time using this tool, I want to practice and ensure everything works smoothly before moving on to the real thing. Once I got the hang of it, I started spraying the seam sealer where I'd removed the old sealant. The gun worked well,
though it left a few small bits around the edges. Nothing major, just something to note for next time. It still covered the seams perfectly, ensuring solid protection. In the future, I'll probably use a brush for better control, but I wanted to try the sprayable gun to match the original factory look. During the process, I also discovered some rust behind the rear wheel arch that I had to address next. After a 24 hours drying process, I began applying the base coat in thin layers, similar to how I applied the rust converter. I used the khaki color for the underbody and matte black around the wheel arches. Once that went through another 24-hour drying process, I finished by applying thin layers of matte lacquer to seal and protect the paint. The results turned out really well, especially since everything was done on my driveway. I was lucky to have great weather, or more accurately, blazing hot weather. It had me sweating like crazy, but on the bright side, it helped the paint and sealant dry quickly and evenly. In the next step, I had to address a common issue that many BMWs had back in the day: the sharp edge on the hole for the fuel tank vent pipe. Over time, this edge could slowly cut into the pipe, which in the worst case scenario might lead to fuel leaks. Luckily, in my case, it hadn't reached that point, but it was still something I wanted to fix to prevent future problems. For the fix, I applied more seam sealer to create a cushion, preventing any further cuts to the vent pipe. Now, moving on to the boot area. I've prepared and masked it for the same process as the underbody. This means cleaning, treating any rust, and applying the khaki paint followed by matte lacquer for protection. Next, I'm removing the steering rack from the steering column. I snapped the lower bolt earlier and I didn't realize there was another bolt at the top. Harder to reach, but now it's time to tackle it.
Later on, I will tackle the rusty engine oil pan as part of a full engine service. Next, I'll remove the transmission cooler pipes since they are a bit rusty. While I'm at it, I'll also drain the transmission fluid and engine oil. Time for disassembling. The polishing process and the result. It's looking almost shiny new. Then it was time to move on to the hydraulic pipes for the dynamic drive and steering. Some of the fittings were seized, like this one, so I tried soaking them in a rust remover dip to loosen them up. For better results, I'm also using the rust remover gel on the pipes. In this scene you can see the pipes, which are so heavily rusted that they might be beyond saving. But hopefully there is still a chance
to save them. The result. Before and after cleaning. There is one spot where the rust has taken a bite, but it hasn't gone that far. It's still looking pretty good overall. More disassembling.
I've decided not to reuse these two hydraulic pipes, which are meant to connect to the active sway bar, since they're known to burst over time. It's better to replace them now to avoid issues down the road, and the same applies to the rear ones. Next, it's time to treat the pipes for the steering rack. The process is the same as with the other pipes. Here are all the pipes I managed to save. I'm going to repeat the treatment process one more time to make sure they're in the best possible condition. Washing, drying process, grinding process, masking process, and ready to be painted. For this I'll be using this paint spray gun and silver matte paint from Foliatec. Even though it's designed for brake calipers, I'm using it on the hydraulic pipes because of its excellent heat resistance, which makes it perfect for the job. So let's get everything set up. First, I'll mix the paint, hardener, and thinner, since I'm using a spray gun. Just like with the seam sealer, this is my first time using this setup, so I practiced for a little while on this old rusty grill to get the hang of it. Once I felt confident with the setup, I moved on to the hydraulic pipes. I applied thin, even coats, making sure to cover everything properly. Here is the look after few coats. The next day, once everything had dried, I went back to paint the other parts of the pipes where the rubber grommets or hooks were located. I also sprayed a few bolts, nuts and some small pipe holders while I was at it. Next, I had to drill out a snapped bolt from the steering rack. Once it was out, I knew the threads on the universal joint would be damaged, so I didn't bother trying to fix it. Instead, I will replace it with a universal joint from my donor 7 series. Once I had the replacement part from the donor car, I cleaned it up, masked it, and gave it a fresh coat of paint. Next up is the crusty differential. First, I had to drain the old oil from it to get started. It's pretty amazing how these labels have managed to stay stuck to the differential all these years. Despite everything, they're still holding on tight. In the next step, I started removing the big chunks of rust from the differential. It's a messy job, but it's essential to get down to clean metal before moving forward. Then I put on the face mask, grabbed the angle grinder and started grinding away all the rust. Now you can see all the rust chunks removed from the differential. A little bit of a brake cleaner. Next, I wanted to remove the drive flanges to tackle more rust hiding underneath. It's a bit more work, but it will ensure everything gets properly cleaned and treated. Following that, I applied the rust remover gel to tackle any remaining rust. And now let's sort out the active sway bars. first I'll need to cut off those rusty sway bar links. Now it's time for the final cleaning of everything before applying the paint. Everything is prepared and ready. Here is the result with the freshly painted surface. It's satisfying to see all that hard work pay off. Once again, I used Foliatec paint for its excellent heat resistance, this time in a matte black finish to match the original factory look.
And that's it for this episode of a Rust Nightmare. Some serious progress was done on this 20-year-old BMW 7 Series. It's been a challenging but rewarding process, and I'm especially glad we managed to save some of those rusty hydraulic pipes. Every small victory counts when restoring a car like this. Plus, I'm happy to say the crusty differential is now looking as good as new. But we're not done yet. There's still plenty of work ahead to bring this 7 Series back to life. If you're enjoying the journey, make sure to subscribe, like and leave a comment, since this will help to grow this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.